Hello, everybody. Chris Profi, Musically Obsessed. I am going to be jumping on to some questions from Scott over at Rock Scout. So if you have not checked out Scott over at Rock Scout, definitely check him out. Real cool channel. He is one of our Scottish friends in the VC, so little unique. Cool guy. He's got 15 questions, and I really had to think about some of these. This has taken me a little bit of research, digging into the CDs, digging into the vinyl. So it's been fun. So I figured I'd show you what I came up with, answer these 15 questions, and show you a little bit of my music collection. So the first question is an album that I feel could really use a reissue. I'm a big Dead Milkmen fan, and this is their album Soul Rotation. This kind of came out after they had reached some level of, let's just say, stardom. They had the album Beelzebubba, which was their biggest hit with Punk Rock Girl on there. And then they came out with an album called Metaphysical Graffiti, which was really good. That sort of, though, kind of started the downward, decline of the Dead Milkmen. And then this album, Soul Rotation, which was totally different. It was like a more mature Dead Milkmen. This is an original, pressing of this album. I'd love to see a reissue of this album, though, with like extra tracks, because I'm sure that there are probably some floating around. This has actually become one of my favorite Dead Milkmen album. Like I said, it's like a more mature Dead Milkmen. I love the songs At That Moment. The Secret of Life is cool. Big Scary Place. It's a cool album. Different sounding though. And I'd love a reissue of this with some extra tracks. That'd be pretty cool. All right, next. A band that I probably have everything that they release, and I've talked about this band a lot. I'm trying to spread the love. Swa. Great band. This is one of my favorite albums by them called Sex Doctor. And I believe that I have everything that they released. On vinyl, CD, and cassette. So if you do not know who Swa is, just a little quick thing here. Chuck Tukowski, who plays bass for Swa, came from Black Flag. So that'll kind of give you an idea of what they sound like. And their lead singer is Meryl Ward. Meryl Ward came from the band Overkill. Not the thrash band Overkill. This was another band called Overkill. Just a really cool band. And not a lot of people know about them. You should definitely check them out. And I believe I have everything that they released. Just a cool band. All right, now this is a cool question. An album with a great cover, but a terrible bad album. This first one came to mind. This is a band called Dingle. And I just love that cover. It's a cute little dog. And the album is called Red Dog, actually. I was thinking this was going to be an awesome album. What led me to Dingle? Well, I'm into the band Slovenly, and Steve Anderson is the vocalist for Slovenly. This came out on the New Alliance label, which is like a subsidiary of SST. What do you call it? Does he play on here? Oh, yes. Greg Ginn plays on here. He was the guitarist for Black Flag. So I'm thinking, all right, this is awesome. It's on New Alliance Records. Greg Ginn plays on here. You've got Steve Anderson, who's the vocalist from Slovenly. Should be an awesome album. This album sucks. I'm sorry. I'm not into this album. I pulled it out the other day and said, you know what? Let me give it another try. I just cannot get through it. It's just an unrealized album, little song snippets, mayhem, just not a cohesive album, just doesn't sound good. I don't like the production. I just don't like the album. Cool cover, kind of catches your eye, but terrible album. I don't know, maybe somebody out there is a Dingle fan and they can change my opinion. I'm not sure. Next, an album with a bad cover, but a great album. This one came to mind. Yes, Anthrax, Fistful of Metal. Terrible album cover. Look at that. I mean, come on, Anthrax. But this album kicks ass. This, of course, was with Neil Turbin on vocals, but you've got Death Rider, Metal Thrashing Mad. They do a version of I'm 18. Panic, Subjugator, Soldiers of Metal, Death from Above, Anthrax, Across the River, and Howling Furies. This came out, this is a 1992 reissue of this on Megaforce. But this was their first album. So, crappy cover, but just great thrash from the early 80s. A short album. This was kind of tricky. I'm showing a lot of CDs, but Husker Du. Their first album, Everything Falls Apart, clocked in around 19 minutes. This happens to be a reissue that has a lot of bonus tracks on it, but the original album was only 19 minutes long. 19 minutes of pure punk fury. Bob Mould, awesome. If you have not listened to Everything Falls Apart by Husker Du, shame on you. Listen to it. Next, an album that introduced me to the genre. I was actually going to do a whole video about jazz the other day because probably about, let's see, my daughter is 15. So yeah, probably about 16 years ago or so, I got into jazz. And everybody has their story of like when they got into jazz. And I was thinking like, what led me to jazz? Because my parents didn't listen to jazz. I never played a jazz instrument. I played guitar. I guess, electric guitar obviously is in jazz bands as well. But I never really was into jazz too much. But then I know that I was trying to think what led me to jazz. And, I started in college listening to the Grateful Dead. And if you're a Dead fan, obviously the Dead do long jams. And Jerry Garcia is all over the guitar. A lot of his solos are very jazz-like. Improvisation, long jams. That sort of led me to like proggy stuff. So, I was listening to a lot of Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I was always into like funky stuff, like Sly and the Family Stone, James Brown, that kind of stuff. And I feel like all of that started bubbling up. And then I remember reading Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time. And I kept seeing this album coming up, Bitches Brew. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a chance on it. And I'm so glad I did. This is the album that introduced me to jazz. And from there, I got into everything. Coltrane, Weather Report, Herbie Hancock, Ornette Coleman, the list goes on. McCoy Tyner. But this was the album. Because when I put this on, I'm like, you know what? That is not too much different than what I'm into. It's a little of that Jerry Garcia improv guitar. It's got a little funk in it. It's got sort of a proggy element to it. Plus, it's got the jazz. Later, I would find out that that was called fusion, obviously. But this is what led me to jazz. And still a favorite of mine. Sorry, that was like a long answer to that question. Next. An album that you might not expect that I like. I think I've shown this before. But if anybody watches my channel, you know I'm into everything. This is an album called Pacific Overtures. It is a Broadway musical. This is by Stephen Sondheim, who wrote such musicals as Sweeney Todd, A Little Night Music, Into the Woods. And this is on the RCA label. Such a cool album. When did this come out? 1976. What is this musical about? It's about the westernization of China. Yeah, Stephen Sondheim wrote a musical about the westernization of China. Pretty heavy topic, but awesome, awesome music. Probably one of those albums, if you put on, it would clear out a party. But it's one of those albums that you got to keep listening to. And I think you either get it or you don't get it. I get it. Just saying. An anticipated album of 2020. Well, I've got quite a bit of stuff in my Amazon cart that's going to be coming out, but the one album that I'm really looking forward to is Testament's new album. Yes, Testament has an album coming out called Titans of Creation. I love Testament. One of my favorite albums by them is Souls of Black, and I know that album, you know, probably isn't a fan favorite, but I love it. I love the song Souls of Black, and I'm really looking forward to Chuck Billy, some Chuck Billy singing. Testament always comes out with great albums, and they just keep getting heavier. So yeah, definitely Testament, Titans of Creation, an anticipated release of 2020. A band that I was late to the party. Well, the band that I can think of lately, and I've got to thank Emma over at 8 Vinyl Low. She keeps talking about Cheap Trick because Cheap Trick was one of her favorite bands. I was never into Cheap Trick. I mean, I've said this before. I love the song from the 80s, The Flame. That's a great song. But I never really, you know, was into Cheap Trick. I found Live at Budokan cheap somewhere. I might have played it once and then put it away. And then I kept hearing Cheap Trick, Cheap Trick, Cheap Trick. And I'm like, okay. So I got Dream Police. And I listened to it. I'm like, holy crap. This is actually really good. I don't know what took me so long to actually listen to Cheap Trick. I recently been listening to the first album as well. So I've got Dream Police, I've got the first album, and I've got Live at Budokan. But this is a band that just really was off my radar for a long time. And I've been listening to them lately going, wow, they should have been on my radar. I was definitely late to that party. So thank you to Emma over at 8 Vinyl Low for, you know, talking about Cheap Trick and eventually pushing me to get that. An album that I play regularly. Anybody who watches this channel knows I'm a big Monkees fan. I'm a big Michael Nesmith fan. This is his album, Nevada Fighter. This is a reissue on white vinyl. I love Michael Nesmith. And this album, this was the third in the trilogy. You've got the Grand Ennui on here. Propinquity, I've Just Begun to Care. That is such a beautiful song. Here I Am, Only Bound, Nevada Fighter, which is a real sweet song. Texas Morning I like. He does a version of Tumbling Tumbleweeds. I Looked Away. That was the Eric Clapton tune. Rainmaker, and an instrumental at the end called Renee with O.J. Red Rhodes on pedal steel guitar. This is just a beautiful album. I listen to this a lot. Love Nevada Fighter. If you are into country rock and you've never listened to Nesmith and his solo records, definitely check anything out by the First National Band. Great stuff. Next, question 11. A recommended album, $10 or less. It could be an album or a CD. Well, you could probably pick these up used for less than $10, definitely. This is a band called Gone. And these guys came out on the SST label, a label that I talk about a lot. This is all instrumental, jazzy, just all over the place, heavy mayhem. You've got Greg Ginn on guitars, and that's all I'm going to say. If you like Greg Ginn, what he did with Black Flag, you're going to like Gone. There are no lyrics, no vocals. This is all instrumental. Just jazzy, like I said, jazzy, heavy, metallic, just all over the place. Craziness, but so good. You can definitely pick these up for under $10. let's see. You've got, on this album, you've got Andrew, is it Weiss on bass? And Simeon Kane on drums. I believe that they went on to be in Henry Rollins' solo band. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the rhythm section of Andrew Weiss on bass and Simeon Kane on drums, I think they went on to be in Henry Rollins' solo band, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but really good stuff that you can definitely pick up for under $10. All right, now, the first album in my collection and the last album in my collection. And I was thinking, should I do it for vinyl or CDs? So I figured I've been shown a lot of CDs, so I will do it in vinyl. The first album in my collection is A Flock of Seagulls' debut album. Such a good album. This is on Jive Records. Love that label. You know, a lot of people know this album for the song I Ran, but you know, you've got so many great songs in here. Space Age Love Song, Don't Ask Me, Messages, I love Telecommunication, Modern Love is Automatic, DNA, Man-Made, just really good synth pop from the 80s. When did this come out? 1982. Just a kick-ass album. I have their other albums as well, too. The last album in my collection, Neil Young, Songs for Judy. This was an album that came out in 2018. But what it is these are live acoustic performances from 1976 that Neil Young did when he was with Crazy Horse. So very cool album, double album. He does versions of The Old Laughing Lady on here, Heart of Gold, Mr. Soul, Sugar Mountain, Pocahontas. Just real cool stuff. The recording is nice, crystal clear. Just classic Neil Young from 1976 live acoustic performances. Very, very cool album. So that's the last album in my collection. Now, question 13. An album that has changed my opinion about a band. Well, I just did a video about this band the other day, Europe. And I talked about all of their latest albums. This album is called Last Look at Eden. This came out in 2009. This changed my opinion about Europe because I said in the video that I was always a fan of Europe. I love the album A Final Countdown. And I really kind of thought that that was all they had to offer. And I felt like it was sort of a dated album and a cool album, but, you know, definitely just dated. And I love the song A Final Countdown, but, you know, it's one of those songs where we've all heard it about a million times. I didn't realize that Europe actually got better. And this is one of the albums that changed my opinion. And I did a whole video on these albums. But basically, if you like Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, Hammond B3 organ, heavy, bluesy, rock and roll, check out what Europe has been laying down lately. This is just one of some of the later albums by them that if you kind of got tired of The Final Countdown, check out these later albums by Europe. They are so good. That definitely changed my opinion about Europe. They have so much more to offer than just The Final Countdown. And I know that they had the earlier albums pre The Final Countdown that were more like power metal, but I didn't realize that these latest albums were as good as they are. So definitely check those out. Question number 14. I've shown this album before, an album that I would save in a fire. Yes, folks, if there was a fire in this apartment, God forbid, and I had to come in and quickly like choose an album that wouldn't get burned up in the fire, Johnny Cash. Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. I've shown this album a lot. This is my favorite Johnny Cash album. This is a reissue on 180. This was one of his folk country albums. And, you know, you've got If I Were a Carpenter on here, See Ruby Fall, his hit Blistered. To Beat the Devil, I believe that's a Chris Christopherson song. I love the song I've Got a Thing About Trains. Wrinkled, Crinkled, Wadded Dollar Bill. There's a duet with June Carter called 'Cause I Love You, which is awesome. The Devil to Pay, South Wind, and Jesus Was a Carpenter. Just an awesome, awesome song. Was To Beat the Devil by Chris Christopherson. See, I've been saying things lately that are wrong, and I want to make sure. Let me see. Oh, shiny. Yes, To Beat the Devil is Chris Christopherson. Whew, I got it right. Yeah, lately I've been saying information that's wrong and people have been pointing it out. I don't know, folks, I'm not perfect. I just really like music. And I'm gonna get things wrong. I'm human, I apologize. And the last question, question 15. A debut album from an artist that came out in 1986. Look at that cover. King Diamond. Yes, from Merciful Fate. This was his debut album, 1986. This is a remastered version. There they are. Love this. Nobody sounds like King Diamond. An amazing vocal range. You've got the candle on here, dressed in white, lurking in the dark, Halloween, voices from the past. Then they included the song No Presents for Christmas and The Lake. Those are some bonus tracks. Very, very strong, strong debut album by King Diamond. I got into King Diamond with the album Them, and of course Abigail. Love those albums. Fatal Portrait is kick-ass. I love the stuff he did with Merciful Fate. One of my favorite albums is Melissa. Awesome, awesome album. I even like some of the later King Diamond albums. I like Spider's Lullaby. He did an Abigail 2, which is really good. And I believe that he's coming out with a new album. His latest live album is really good as well. I did a little quick video about that too. So definitely a real cool debut from 1986, King Diamond, Fatal Portrait. So that's it, folks. 22-minute long video. Wow. So check out Scott over at Rock Scout. Check out his channel. Real cool guy. He's bringing some Scottish love. Real cool question, Scott. Thank you. It caused me to think today. So it might be the only thinking I actually do today. Hopefully you guys liked it. Listen, enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and listen to music.